Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and in the next couple of videos, we're going to be talking about zombies. They're not necessarily fast zombies, in fact they move pretty slow when you think about it, but they are incredibly powerful, with some having similar power to that of some nation states. That's right, today we're talking about Shadow Realm capitalism. In the last episode, I gave a pretty generous description of capitalism. What I described is how it was meant to work by its bright-eyed supporters. But to me, it's all a game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Specifically, which is probably a little bit of a weird comparison, but here we are, all playing this game with arbitrary rules that seem to only benefit the winners. With there being a lot of canon examples in Yu-Gi-Oh! Of players cheating in the show, going unacknowledged, and also leading to episode-defining wins. But it's more than capitalism just being a game that we're all playing for a high score. Like Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a game where the whole world has devoted its every effort to expanding. NFTs are like the holographic stadiums of the show, leaving many to wonder why a world with so many problems would go to such lengths to put a card game in the very middle of society while just desperately not improving everything else. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a world where there are whole schools devoted to playing better because it's the only way to get ahead in society, and the world's most powerful company makes playing cards. Is our world so different? This is a world where your best shot at fame and fortune is understanding the meta, and figuring out how to do the most broken thing you can, A, without getting caught, and B, before it gets banned. So what is the meta that players are rushing to copy? What is that must-have deck, that win condition combo? It's a real Rube Goldberg strategy called Monopoly, and only the best players have ever been able to pull it off. And new players stack their decks in attempts to create the newest and most powerful monopolies. So, in the years after the shift in Fed policy, characterized by the reaction to 2008, every new player in the game, or at least serious players trying to win big tournaments, were playing a Monopoly deck with cards of monumental value. Your average card shop gamer would have to inherit a really powerful deck from their grandpa to even enter into such a meta, and even then your success is not ensured. It helps if grandpa owns a card shop or card company too, but maybe I'm getting too deep into this metaphor. As you're probably well aware, most of us don't have a grandfather who can just gift us Monopoly power, or the cash to start one ourselves. And collectively, we had a lot of trouble recovering from the Great Recession. There was both stagnant wage growth, in part due to the monopolization of so many mergers and the consolidation of power that brought the economy for workers. It was so tightly controlled during this time that people even turned to gig work to try to upset the crooked system, discovering labor practices there that were even more exploitive. And at the same time, while many things were very hard, in small ways, certain things got easier for us because there were any number of brand new companies popping up overnight like instant behemoths in their industry and offering ridiculous savings to their customers. Meanwhile, other companies that were household names were losing money year after year. And I really should have made a video about this topic specifically at least 2 years ago when I first thought about this, but this all leads into something that I'd like to coin as Uber economics, which represents the startup culture of the 2010s, and as a different type of economics, seems like one that would be very unlikely to exist in any other state than life support capitalism. See, Uber is a scam. The business sense of this just doesn't make sense, unless it's viewed as a scam. So follow me on this. Uber has never been profitable. Even with the amount that they exploit their workers, they can't be asked to turn a profit. And that is because they have to A, create a large company and infrastructure, and B, compete across the country and across the world with well-established and relatively cheap taxi services. And the only way to do this is to just charge less, which gives you a real big profitability issue. But as the investors in companies like this understand, it's not about making profit now. In fact, these are basically black holes for investment. And at first, it's not about creating a traditionally successful company. It's about creating a company that can bleed money and drown all of its competition in the blood. And once all of that competition is dead, they can charge whatever the hell they want now. By then, you would want to own shares in the only profitable taxi company because everyone else has been driven out of business. See, 2010 startups are all about trying to speed run a monopoly by throwing as much money at every problem you face that you just win from having the most money. These zombies hemorrhage money like blood in hopes that their competition might slip up and just drown on all of their wasted capital. And while at first this seems like it benefits the consumer because at least they're getting an incredibly discounted product, beyond what even makes any sort of good business sense to them, but the longer term effect is a much wider hollowing out of the economy where entire industries die and are replaced by companies that never have been good companies in a traditional sense and are now just left with a monopolistic control of the market. Or at least that's the concept. It's just another route towards monopolization and merger culture. This also means that a huge amount of that cash that was funneled into destroying more traditional small businesses, destroying a healthy and diverse ecosystem, or at least as healthy as things can be under capitalism, into what's beginning to look like an industry by industry version of a monoculture. Now, this didn't end up working out as well as some of the investors may have hoped it did, but it did represent a growing portion of the market, and as well was a pressure or competitor in the market for small businesses that already weren't doing great. And you can see how this led to a sort of perfect storm with the pandemic. Because while these big companies are getting these big dollar free money fed loans, your local small businesses aren't. And when the economy gets bailed out, that money just falls along the same lines. But there's one more thing to understand, and that's to go back and revisit the idea of fictitious markets. Because capitalism has increasingly had trouble expanding. I think it's a good indication of that so many people were willing to take these long-term investments, that we're going to lose such massive amounts of money right off the bat. But this is happening because every bailout, companies that get bailed out do things like stock buybacks, which inflates the price of their stock to the benefit of the remaining capitalist shareholders, which makes a whole lot of already wealthy people much wealthier. And a lot of this money trickling down made its way into the cryptocurrency and derivative markets, and products like NFTs. This is the same type of digital disruption that we see in other startups and other markets, but in a more distributed manner, which ultimately means to replace banking, investments, and currency, even though its product is technically none of them. And when it comes to regulations, that technicality is really important, because one of the things that capitalist governments tend to care about is protecting their banks and investor class. Although we are starting to see some efforts coming against the biggest grifters in the market, and this could be working its way down, and it could just be the case that the government has been really slow to catch up. Or they're only getting to it now and they've been aware of this the whole time and just done nothing. Anyways, all of this led to a wave of paid influencers propping up massive rug pulls in an entire system that seems designed explicitly to be like our current financial system, but unregulated. And this has been such an absolute failure in terms of the laughable corruption that it's almost like they were trying to speedrun economic collapse. And finally, in 2022, it seems like they may have finally done it, which unfortunately has taken a lot of money from retail investors that thought this was the next big thing and then lost everything. And that sucks. But it was a gamble. You knew it was a gamble, and I hope that you learn to remember that next time before you gamble away your money on something that doesn't offer you any sort of a legally backed guarantee. Speaking of guarantees, though, there are a number of Ponzi schemes setting up within the crypto market that have failed recently, with the biggest being stuff like Tether, SafeMoon, and UST, one of which was offering investors 20% returns guaranteed on their cryptocurrency with other cryptocurrencies that the investors owned coming into the deal. So making this like a sort of bank, if you will, for cryptocurrencies, except that unlike your normal savings account, it's offering you like 200 to 2,000 times the interest rate that banks are right now. And if this seems like it's too good to be true, well, it's because it is. Because this is an unregulated industry, and when that coin collapsed, people lost everything that they had put into it. And that guarantee of theirs became absolutely worthless. And not only did they not have the income that they were guaranteed, they lost the principal of their investment as well. But it also feels a bit like all the things that I was talking about in my video on scam economics, which enabled the processes that I'm discussing here. So much money was being pumped into the top of our economy that grifters lined up to create the most absurd scams to hook investors looking for the next big thing. Which is not to say that Web3 is a way that money is predominantly trickling down in our economy. I'm not sure there's any data to support that, as well as a great number of retail investors getting grifted into the scam, especially in its bigger and more recent waves. But I think that it's hard to argue that such a thing would have started or grown to the point where retail investors could even be tricked by it without investors with piles more money than sense driving up the price over all these years since it started. This is the really dark power of juicing up our investor class every time they fail, because at this point it has taught them that failure is more profitable than success. If Uber really became the only taxi service in America and they suffered a financial downfall, then wouldn't they be able to ask for a government bailout in the same way that our failing businesses of airlines do? As an aside, the pandemic airlines are even more scammy, canceling tons of flights that people have already paid for and that they knew months in advance they couldn't fly due to being short-staffed even before the flights were canceled. Much of this money is never refunded to the consumer, although Bernie Sanders is fighting to get Pete Buttigieg to care about this issue, and we'll see what happens with that. But basically, the airlines are grifting everyone right now, the Fed and the public alike. And isn't it a little scary to think about Uber having the power to do this, or some other company that had completely dominated an industry? Everywhere you look, money is moving at a frantic and manic pace, chasing the next new trend of potential monopoly. And yet it is doing absolutely nothing for our own material conditions, if not actually making them worse. And by encouraging too big to fail, we made too big to fail the only profitable model. And so every new startup had the goal of becoming too big to fail. But this isn't just a curse of startups, it's also the curse of many mergers and acquisitions. Over the last 10 years, everywhere you look, a household name is buying another. And this I feel kind of old saying this, but I remember when Kraft was Kraft and Heinz was Heinz. And now they're Kraft Heinz due to a long series of mergers and acquisitions from when I was a kid. They're basically not even the same companies anymore. They're just the people who own the brand that I might sometimes be nostalgic for. And what I'm getting at here is that in response to the death and failure of our former economic system, the Fed has been effectively propping up everything that's too big to fail. What if instead we let companies that try to extort us in this way go by the wayside and die off, ushering in a new age in which we'd actually have to care about the stability of what you create, and if they need a bailout, the government should then instead offer them a buyout. We shouldn't let these companies not only be able to get away with their mistakes, but also profit from them as well. The people who led to these mistakes must not be actively encouraged to make them again. They must be removed from the equation. And this, with the exception of NFTs, was all before 2020. Before we move on, I want to answer a single question. And if this is how the game is played, and I'm not supposed to hate the player and instead hate the game, how can we fix this broken meta? It's simple. We have to nerf monopoly powers until it's unviable and uncompetitive. The SEC needs to get a lot more proactive in breaking up monopoly powers in industries, and we need to be a lot more active in denying mergers as they come up. But also, the Fed can't keep continuing offering a revolving door of credit to every company that's trying to speedrun a startup. I get the idea of financial seed money being able to help the economy grow being a good thing, but if at no point can you ever make yourself profitable enough to actually pay back those debts, we should eventually stop offering people a revolving door of credit. People have started creating companies that can't be competed with without remaking the entire economy entirely to unseat the previous champion of playing Monopoly decks. So we have to rewrite the rules. So that you can't just let your company survive off of low interest loans or a lack of competition. Otherwise, we have to admit that we aren't even playing capitalism anymore. We're just playing Monopoly.